Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to my guest, Mr. Michael Green. We are in a moment in which we are really living some historical, very unprecedented moments. Moments of distress, moments of anxiety, and of worldwide protests against police brutality, against all the deaths by police which have been happening, against, in general, racism in America. The whole world has seen it and the whole world is responding. And this is a very unprecedented response because it's really all over. The fact that on top of all this, Trump, in this precise moment, decides to hold his first election rally on June 20th, which is the day after Juneteenth, which is the day in which it's celebrated the end of slavery. It's the anniversary of the end of slavery, and that is holding this rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is exactly the place in which in 1921 there was the most horrible race massacre in the history of the United States. This fact makes me feel that in the least, he's been a little misguided in this choice. And in the worst of hypotheses, this is a provocation that is not something we need in this moment and we could expect from the person who's supposed to be the commander-in-chief and the person in charge of leading and uniting this country. So let's now go a step back and let's see what happened in Black Wall Street in 1921. Black Wall Street is also the title of the play that Mr. Michael Green, our guest, welcome, has produced and has directed, and that it tells all the events that happened in that terrible massacre. So, Mr. Green, welcome to our show, and thank you for doing all the beautiful pieces that you do, because you haven't just done that, you've done many other historical pieces. You've done some pieces about MLK and many other that I've seen and that are all very beautiful. So let's go back in history and tell our viewers what was Wall Street, when was it established, and why was it called Black Wall Street?
Thank you, Maria. Black Wall Street was the name given to a town in Tulsa, Oklahoma called Greenwood, which was established around 1906. It got its name ultimately from, the name became Greenwood, named after a town in Mississippi. One of the founders had visited Greenwood and was impressed with what they were trying to accomplish even there, and had plans to duplicate that in Tulsa, Oklahoma. As the towns prospered, it later became known as Black Wall Street, a name given to them by Booker T. Washington. Greenwood was a totally self-sufficient community, primarily blacks, a few Indians, some Jews in the outskirts, occupied this north end of Tulsa. And because of segregation, they were forced to inculcate and sort of trade amongst themselves. And they did so very well. It was the, nepotism was front and center. They collaborated and networked in a way unprecedented. By the time 1921 came around, they were probably the most successful Black community ever produced in this country. They had over 600 thriving businesses within a 36-block radius. They had a bus system, 2 movie theaters. They had 5 hotels. They had their own schools. They ran a post office. They had a hospital. They had a taxi system. At least 6 families had their own airplanes. So there was, brick and mortar on both sides of the street. Over 1,000 people owned, and they built and owned their own homes. They had 5 churches and 21 restaurants and several grocery stores. So it was a thriving community.
Self-sufficient, thriving community that, in fact, took advantage of segregation, which is
Absolutely
pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. How did it become so prosperous? What was the reason?
Well, when oil was discovered in Oklahoma, that set off a land grab, and whites from all over the country migrated quickly to take advantage of this new source of wealth. So much so that in a few short years, Tulsa was the top producing oil producer, presenting up to 2,000 barrels of oil a day. They were the top producer of oil in the world for a short period of time.
Which is so amazing.
Never amazing, right? You never expect that. Yes. Right. And so even with segregation, there was so much wealth that some of that wealth had to trickle down. There were blacks who took advantage of the land grants that were given to the Indians after the Civil War, and they owned property. And so a lot of them actually had oil on their property. They weren't able to, I think there may be one black who actually had a oil well that he actually ran. But most of the oil production was controlled by whites, naturally. But even so, because of segregation, blacks were able to take full advantage of the wealth that trickled down to them from the oil industry.
This is a really fascinating story. And if I remember well from what you told me, there was a guy, a person, Gurley, I think, who had purchased 40 acres and then sold them. And that's how it all started. Sold them to other black people.
Absolutely. The name of that gentleman was
O.W. Gurley.
O.W. Gurley. Yes, he bought 40 acres of land, and it was this contention that the land be resold and developed by other blacks. So he was very significant, and that was the original landmass that became Greenwood. As a matter of fact, he was the one who actually named it Greenwood.
It is really fantastic. So how successful was it? Because you said there were all these incredible businesses. And then what happened? Which years we're talking about? It was founded in 1906?
1906. And they built steadily, over time, so that by 1921, it was a fully realized society, a city within a city, if you will. And the population was about 10,000 in 1921. And like I said, they had churches, they had their own schools, businesses across a wide spectrum. And although some of the residents had to work downtown where they were discriminated against, they could not shop, they could not eat, but they were able to go and work as domestics, shoe shine persons, and other, sort of trivial jobs that they did. They were still quite skillful. So a lot of the carpentry work was done by a lot of these residents of Greenwood. And so they took full advantage of that and said, well, we can't buy downtown. We can't, integrate downtown. We don't need to. We're going to do it all right here at home in Greenwood. And that's what they did.
Perfect. It was perfect for them. So what happened? What sparkled this massacre?
Well, when you have some whites who aren't able to compete with their contemporaries, if you will, the poorer whites, were frustrated that they could look across the tracks and see successful Negroes who owned their own homes, who had indoor plumbing when some of them did not, driving some of the latest automobiles, dressed in some clothes, some of them even imported from France and other places. But there were tailors, within the community. So, and they had very fine homes and businesses. This created a sense of unparalleled jealousy and animosity. And this all came to a head on May 31st, 1921. Oddly enough, it was Decoration Day, which is now called Memorial Day, but then they called it Decoration Day. There were a lot of veteran soldiers living in Greenwood at the time. So this was a big occasion for them to celebrate Memorial Day weekend. But as things would happen, Dick Rowland, who was a shoe shine, what they called them boot blacks then, and he was shining shoes as he did, making somewhere between $5 and $10 a day, which was really good money back then. There was only one place in downtown, that they could actually go and relieve themselves. It was on the top floor of the Drexel building. So as usual, he would take his break, go to the Drexel building, and relieve himself. Mm-hmm. He got on the elevator. The elevator operator was a young white girl named Paige. Her first name, I forget her first name, but her last name was Paige. Carol Page, I believe. I could be mistaken. Anyway, Miss Page, took him up to the top floor. He got off. I assume went to the bathroom, came back, got on the elevator. But as he was exiting the elevator, she screamed. And there's only one thing for a black man to do when a white woman screams. He didn't know why she was screaming, and he ran. Mm-hmm. It was later reported that he had molested her, attacked her, and the story got embellished as time went on, as the day progressed. I mean, it got to the point where he raped and beat her and all of these types of things. So anyway, he was arrested, and they took him to the jailhouse and locked him inside the jail. And it didn't take long for a mob to gather. And when word got around that, as a matter of fact, the Tribune printed in their afternoon edition that there's news to lynch Negro tonight. And this started circulating, amongst the white populace, and the crowd began to grow. When the black soldiers and other men of Greenwood heard what had happened and the threat to lynch this young man over an alleged assault, they went down to the courthouse with their guns, wanting to protect, to make sure that they weren't going to take this man out and lynch him. Mm-hmm. But the sheriff assured them that, well, this is not going to happen. We're going to protect him. So the men went home. But the white mob were allowed to stay, and their numbers continued to grow into the thousands. So when the soldiers learned that the number was growing and the threat became even more dire, they returned to the courthouse, 75 strong, determined to make sure that, it wasn't going to go down the way they thought. Mm-hmm. Anyhow, the sheriff again admonished the men to return to Greenwood and that they had it. And but on their way out to do just that, they were confronted by some of the white men. And, one white man decided he was going to take one of the guns, away from one of the soldiers. And he resisted. And during that struggle, a shot went out. And at that point, it was on. And the men had to retreat back to Greenwood. The crowd grew and grew to where it was 15,000 to 1. This angry white mob descended on Greenwood, and they began to loot, to burn, and murder. The police began to arrest and detain, some of the men from Greenwood, and put them in detention centers. This gave the white mob, full freedom to go in and ransack and to loot. They didn't just burn. They stole money from the bank. People that had money in their homes, they took all their money. They took jewelry. They took clothing. They took pianos. They took cars. They took whatever they could take from Greenwood, and then they burned it. People were shot as they were fleeing. By the next day, June 1st, it was the wasteland. It had been reduced to rubble.
This is terrible, because what you say about a white woman saying something and being believed. Unfortunately, we just had an incident not so long ago in Central Park. So not so much has changed, unfortunately not. We only have one more minute.
Wow, time flies when you're having fun.
Yes, I hope it's right, because here it says 26 minutes.
Already?
Wow. Saying to me so much. Because I wanted to ask you what happened afterwards, because I know that the NAACP and other township in Oklahoma came in and helped.
Well, afterwards,
right?
Afterwards, there was promises to help. There was, public outrage, but it wasn't sincere, because the city didn't do anything initially to really help the residents. Many of the townspeople, especially the men, were still detained. And because they were missing from their jobs, those that had jobs in the downtown, causing, a interruption into their economy, white people had to come and petition to get their workers released. And so, yeah, and you had to have a ribbon, or stating that you work for so and so, or some type of insignia. Else you couldn't be free to move about. So reminds you of what they did with the Jews and during World War II. So not only are they the victims of a white riot, which is how it should accurately be called. They call it a race riot as if it were mutual. The black citizens were only protecting themselves. The white people were looting and murdering and pillaging, and so it was a white riot, if you want to get it correct. And so here it is to have this atmosphere of intimidation. There are many people who fled, never to return. There were businesses that never got a chance to rebuild. They did rebuild, but it was never the same. Yeah. If you shatter a glass and try to put it back together, it's never going to be exact. There'll be pieces missing, jagged edges. It was never the same. And that needs to be pointed out. They stopped a momentum. They stopped a movement, something that could have replicated itself all around the country.
We could have had a country in which people coexisted in peace without having all these tensions that have been ravaging this country. Because, racial profiling, racial discrimination and so on, it's a fact that I noticed being not European, being Italian, which is a specific type of European. Coming here, I feel it. This is one of the things that is hurting more in this moment, is this. All these racial tensions, all these killings has really put, I'm sick to myself.
Yes.
The COVID didn't do that.
No.
All this did that.
Yes, yeah.
That's really bad. We are living in a very difficult situation. But the fact that the world is listening, the world is watching, and the world is watching America, what are you doing? Because the young generation that are protesting for the majority, they have not lived through these events that you have been talking about. And so now, when they see it, because now the difference is now we see them. They were happening before, but we didn't see them. We heard about it, but we never saw it. Now we are seeing it. And those graphic images are so strong that these young people are saying, oh no, that's not gonna happen. We are not
Right.
gonna accept that. This is not the
Mhm.
world I want to live in.
Yes.
So I think this is gonna be a turning point. I really hope so. But tell me another thing. There were more than one so-called Black Wall City. There were a lot of good, beautiful, wealthy cities that were built by African Americans and which were thriving, right?
Yes. In Oklahoma alone, there were over 27 other Black towns and townships established. Another one that was highly successful was Boley, uh, in Boley, Oklahoma, not so far from Tulsa. There were other communities, as you stated. You know, people know a little bit about Rosewood in Florida.
Yeah.
There was Hayti in Durham, North Carolina, and right here in New York was the Seneca Village, which was right in the middle of Central Park before it was Central Park. This thriving community was displaced through public domain, you know, and this city was displaced. They weren't given a place to replace and rebuild. You know, they were sort of just split up and dispersed. So we lost the benefit of that thriving Black community.
That is so horrible. Okay, we have unfortunately come to the end of this very interesting conversation. There is much more to talk about, but our viewers can also read the articles that appeared on Harlem News with an interview with you about Tulsa, about Black Wall Street. So I thank you for having participated to this, having been my guest, having been my guinea pig for the first Zoom meeting, Zoom interview in this way. I hope it will look okay, good enough, because the interest is a lot. And as usual, you can see us on every Saturday at 12:30 on Spectrum, channel 1993, every Saturday, 12:30 afternoon. Thank you for being with us. Thank you, Mr. Michael Green.
You're welcome. Thank you.